Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, DwyerVIP.com, on Roku, Dwyer Sports Betting. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. I'm going to ramble a little bit at the beginning of this video. It's come to my attention that Arturo Gatti, very charismatic fighter, involved in some high-action fights, died tragically post-career. Apparently he got elected to the Boxing Hall of Fame. Now I think we really need to be careful here. Was there ever a time, let me address serious boxing fans out there, was there ever a time when you had Arturo Gatti ranked among your top 10 pound for pound in the sport? Was there ever a time when you looked at Arturo Gatti in his prime and thought, this is one of the very best boxers in the sport? Let's talk about what happened when Arturo Gatti stepped up. He fought Ivan Robinson twice. This is at the end of the 1990s. These were big fights. They've been forgotten because of his series of fights with Mickey Ward. But he fought Ivan Robinson twice, and he got beaten twice. Are we now going to put Ivan Robinson in the Hall of Fame? The Mickey Ward fights were dramatic. Was there ever a time when Mickey Ward was on your top 10 pound for pound? Was there ever a time when you looked at Mickey Ward and considered him to be a dominant champion? Right? Gatti tried to jump up against Oscar De La Hoya. He got knocked out, folks. He got knocked out in the first half of the fight. I believe it's around round 5 or 6. Right? But he got knocked out. The same thing happened when he stepped in the ring with Floyd Mayweather. Can a guy be a Hall of Famer when during his career there's a whole class of fighter above him? You know, De La Hoya, Mayweather, these guys were in people's pound for pound top 10. Their body of work vastly exceeds Arturo Gatti's. Right? Are we rewarding a guy for exciting fights, or are we putting a guy in the Hall of Fame because he's a Hall of Fame talent? Right? I would argue that Arturo Gatti falls in that zone of very good career, very entertaining fighter, boxing celebrity, not a Hall of Famer. Right? The Hall of Fame are for those champions, even if they were champions for a short period of time, who you looked at them and you thought, this is his era. Right? Mike Tyson. You know, or when a guy has a long level of dominance where you have no doubt that he's the best in his class. Larry Holmes. Many other names come to mind. Right? Vitaly Klitschko. The Hall of Fame is really only supposed to be for the best of the best. Not for contenders, but for champions. Right? You don't put guys in the Hall, and I understand Gatti had a belt, and I understand Gatti beat people like Tracy Patterson. Okay, great. The question is simply, Tracy Patterson, did you consider him to be a special champion? A Floyd Mayweather, an Oscar De La Hoya, right? I would question that. You know, Gatti, one of my favorite fighters, personally. I thought the guy was an absolute warrior. But it's more than being a warrior that gets you in the Hall of Fame. I thought it was also talent and accomplishment, right? It's not good enough to go in the ring ready to fight. You actually have to have the Hall of Fame talent and the big fights that you've actually won on your resume. The sport has too many guys who have multiple belts, who have literally several memorable fights. To put a guy in the Hall of Fame who, quite frankly, when he stepped up in class against Ivan Robinson, against Oscar De La Hoya, against Floyd Mayweather, came up short, and came up short by a significant margin, right? The Mayweather fight, Gatti hits the canvas multiple times. I mean, I believe his corner throws in the towel or something like that. I mean, that's a merciful ending on that fight, right? I don't know how you can have a guy who was in Oscar De La Hoya's weight class, Floyd Mayweather's weight class, who's a contemporary of both and who didn't dominate, make the Hall of Fame. Okay, now speaking of the Hall of Fame, you have a fight between two guys who I believe may both get in the Hall of Fame, right? Legitimately. You know, where we look at them and say, wow, I remember what these guys did. Both of these guys have already been in very memorable fights. Both of these guys have worn belts. And I'm talking about the upcoming proposed rematch between champions Mikkel Kessler and Carl Froch at 168 pounds. Now it's being discussed, it might be announced, they're going to have to dot the I's and cross the T's. Apparently there's some contract out there where Froch is to fight Bute next, right? Maybe the Bute people realized that he didn't look that good against Denis Grachev, and maybe the Bute people privately are hoping that Mikkel Kessler takes care of their Carl Froch problem, right? And Bute does have a Carl Froch problem because Froch beat him up pretty badly in that fight. A fight I thought Bute was going to win. But let's talk about this rematch. Now, we've seen this fight before. Let's break down the film together. You'll know where I'm coming from. You can either say that Dwyer has lost it. Let me write some words of wisdom in the comment section so that his viewers aren't completely misled. Or you may nod your head and say, you know what, I think he's right. In my opinion, looking at the first fight, Carl Froch has the better jab. Right now, let me say this. It's true, Kessler has the faster hands, and Kessler is very good at trying to sneak up on you and throw fast hooks. No question about it. Here's the problem. You know, Carl Froch looked pretty good in that first fight. I know he lost that first fight, but he did some things very well. And Carl Froch has gotten better, in my opinion, since that first fight. Keep in mind, since that first fight, Carl Froch has put on a boxing clinic against Arthur Abraham. Right? Since that first fight, Carl Froch has fought Andre Ward and Glenn Johnson and Lucien Bute. Right? Hasn't been knocked out by any of the three. More importantly, quite frankly, he outboxed Glenn Johnson. Looked good doing it. He destroyed Lucien Bute. He came on toward the latter part of his fight against Andre Ward. Right? And let me say, I know Froch is 35 years old, but he's that rare fighter since he doesn't rely on hand speed or foot speed. since he's a technician who's relying on angles and, his stance and his defense. I would argue that, like Vladimir Klitschko, another late bloomer, Carl Froch has never been better. I think Carl Froch, with his jab right now, won't allow Kessler to get as close to him as Kessler got at times in the first fight. Let me also say, too, that between these two guys, even though they're both relatively tall, they're big for 168. I believe Carl Froch is 6'1". But Froch is the guy who fights longer. He's the guy who uses more length, right? He's more upright. He keeps you farther away from him. He's harder to find in part because of his jab. And he also has the better defense. Certainly has the better understanding of spacing. There are times in that first fight where Froch reached a point where, while standing in front of Mikhail Kessler, he was able to drop his hands because he was aware that because of the spacing, Kessler couldn't reach him. Also, read the cuts. Look at the guys at the end of the first fight. Kessler has a cut eye. Kessler's face looks beaten up. Kessler himself looked exhausted. He looked spent. Carl Froch, on the other hand, looked fresher. Looked like he could have gone another 2 rounds, in my opinion. Right? Let's also talk about Mikhail Kessler for a second. Now, while Carl Froch, quite frankly, looks to be improving, Kessler, who, keep in mind, was unbeaten when he lost to Joe Calzaghe in an excellent fight, Kessler's had to shake your outings. Kessler got dropped by Alan Green. Dropped. He got off the canvas. He had a grin on his face. He was able to stop Alan Green later. But all I'm saying is, Kessler these days is getting hit. Right? This fight also is not going to be in Kessler's backyard like the first fight was. They're talking about having the fight in England. Now, whether it takes place in Froch's backyard of Nottingham or in London, just understand that the judges might not be swayed by the home crowd the same way they were swayed in the first fight. Right? I thought Kessler won the first fight, but I thought it was this close. Could have gone either way. I think it's a good idea to look at these fights before the promoters get involved and start putting their public spin out, before the fighters get involved and start telling you how they're going to take out the other guy. All I can say is, the way I see it right now, December 20th, 2012, I like Carl Froch in the rematch. In fact, I'll go further. I think Carl Froch has a chance. It's an outside chance. But I believe he has a chance late in this fight of getting a stoppage. I believe Carl Froch's ability to use length, shoot a jab, and then set up his power shots, as well as his superior defense, offsets the advantage Kessler has in terms of hand speed and combinations. I like Carl Froch in the Froch-Kessler rematch. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com and on Roku as well. Thanks for watching.